Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier with another of my presentations on Vietnam. This one looks at America's war in the air in Vietnam, a war that pitted the most advanced of American technology against the Viet Cong. Now when it comes to how wars are fought, the things that past questions have focused on are the nature, the role, the impact and the importance or significance, particularly for victory, of in this case air power. Well, just as its effectiveness can be questioned, America did lose the Vietnam War, so too can the morality of America's tactics, and that has links to its significance. The American war in Vietnam really started with a sustained and systematic bombing campaign using B-52s. If you know your music, you'll know the band. This was Rolling Thunder, aimed at military targets and supply lines. It started in March 1965, some 6 months after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. But no matter its military targets, its strategic aim was threefold: destroy North Vietnamese morale, lift South Vietnamese morale, and bring the North Vietnamese to the negotiating table. The campaign caused heavy civilian casualties, but the main outcome from the bombing was that it helped the North Vietnamese recruitment drive. And in anticipation of North Vietnamese retaliation, ground troops were sent to protect the Da Nang Air Base. 2 battalions, or about 3,500 men. These are the first troops on the ground in Vietnam. In 1967, Rolling Thunder was extended, targeting oil facilities throughout North Vietnam, electrical, steel and cement works, including those close to Hanoi and Haiphong, taking care not to hit Chinese or Soviet ships. And it also targeted the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Laos and Cambodia, 2 neutral countries, were also bombed, and bombed throughout the war. Lives were turned upside down for the North Vietnamese. For example, schools were moved to the countryside, and there were more civilian casualties. But their morale never cracked. Already, America had a clear indication that their military might would likely not prevail. And with more sorties being flown, more American planes were shot down, and more American pilots taken prisoner. Napalm was actually first used in World War II, extensively against the Japanese, but also against Germany. It was used in Korea too. In Vietnam, it was first used by flamethrowers to clear out bunkers. But reports also exist saying that it was often used to clear out or destroy so-called enemy villages, which implies that it was used against civilians as well. American bombers began to drop napalm bombs, destroying huge areas in unquenchable fire, and so denying the Viet Cong vital cover. But it also led to many more civilian casualties. One of the most iconic photographs taken during the Vietnam War, shown on this slide, shows children fleeing from a napalm strike, burnt and terrified. The American public were as horrified by what they saw as were the Vietnamese, and napalm became a symbol of American brutality. Agent Orange, a powerful herbicide, was used extensively in Vietnam and in Laos and parts of Cambodia. Other herbicides were used too. It was first requested by Diem. Planes and helicopters sprayed the chemicals onto the land, but trucks, boats and even backpack sprayers were used too. It was used to destroy the forest cover of the Viet Cong, but also to destroy their food supplies. Agent Blue was mostly used for this. But of course, the Americans were unable to distinguish Viet Cong food supplies from peasant farms. Roughly 2.9 million hectares of Vietnamese farmland and forests were affected. Some 20,000 Vietnamese villages were sprayed, exposing up to 4 million Vietnamese people to toxins. It had a devastating effect on the Vietnamese environment. Of course it did. Evidence of dioxin is still found in Vietnam's soil, water, and its food chain. And as well as resulting in infertility, miscarriages, and deformed babies, long after the war, it is thought to be the reason behind cancers, heart conditions, liver diseases, and neurological conditions. Again, it only turned Americans against the war, against what America was doing to innocent peasants. Now, though helicopters were used extensively in the Korean War, Vietnam was to be known as the first helicopter war, with helicopters flying over 36 million sorties. They were used for reconnaissance missions, as well as scouting. Armed gunships provided close air support to ground troops with machine guns, rockets, and grenade launchers. They were used to ferry men in and out, notably on search and destroy missions, enabling them to get into the most remote areas, resupplying remote outposts. They were the trucks of the war, ferrying armaments, including artillery and other supplies, even dropping propaganda leaflets. They were also used for search and rescue missions and were vital for transporting wounded soldiers from the battlefield, significantly improving survival rates. And for the Americans, the war ended as it began, with a massive and sustained bombing campaign of North Vietnam using B-52s. And an important point to add here is that in all the bombing campaigns in Vietnam, cluster bombs were used, so adding to the indiscriminate killing of civilians. The overarching aim of Linebacker 1 was to bring a halt to the NVA's Easter Offensive, or Spring-Summer Offensive of 1972, by cutting off its military supplies, and so bring North Vietnam back to the negotiating table for an acceptable peace agreement. It targeted railroads, bridges and fuel supplies, and for the first time since Rolling Thunder, industrial zones were targeted again. From the outset, civilian casualties, collateral damage was the military term, were high. Over 150,000 tons of bombs were dropped. And it was the first sustained bombing campaign to extensively use laser-guided and electro-optically guided munitions. And it was a success. The Easter Offensive stalled, and the Vietnamese did come back to the negotiating table. But just as the deal seemed close, Nixon got cold feet and wanted more concessions from the Vietnamese. And so Linebacker 2, a campaign that hit North Vietnam over Christmas 1972. This was a concentrated round-the-clock bombing campaign targeting the Hanoi Haiphong area. Major complexes like power plants, rail yards and airfields were targeted. It was the most aggressive bombing campaign of the war, and it brought a peace settlement, but not the peace with honour that was President Nixon's overriding aim. In truth, America would leave Vietnam with its tail between its legs, and with helicopters helping people flee the American embassy in Saigon. You'll see that on the last slide. Defeated in everything but name. So, I hope that's useful for you. I certainly think it covers you for the exam. But don't forget that if you want to better apply your knowledge to potential exam questions, that is one of the things I particularly focus on in tutorials. So if you're interested, why not see if I have a slot available and get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can sort something out. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.